is this the last chance this week to stop a no-deal Brexit?
I think it almost certainly is, because I think that the Prime Minister is going to close Parliament down on Monday week. We will then come back on the 14th of October for a Queen's speech. You can't have any other parliamentary business for 4 or 5 days after that. So the first time we could come back to this is probably 21st, 22nd of October, which is the week before we would crash out. So this is almost certainly the last chance. And I think it's very important for everybody going into this week to appreciate that.
That explains, I suppose, some of the high emotions around all of this. On your side, the Labour Party has been involved in demonstrations up and down the country. Laura Parker, who's national convener of Momentum in the Labour Party, and somebody you've worked with, said this very recently. She said, there's thousands of us who will join an occupation of Parliament and block the roads before we let Johnson close the doors on democracy. Today, we're going to contact all Momentum supporters and encourage them to protest, occupy, and blockade on Saturday. Our message to Johnson is that if you steal our democracy, we will shut down the streets. Others of your colleagues want to actually occupy Parliament. How far would you go?
Well, Andrew, I was very struck with the protest that went on yesterday, because they're across the whole country, in towns and villages. You referenced this earlier in the programme. Lots and lots of people coming out. And I think they're concerned about two things. They do not like the idea that Parliament is being shut down at this vital time, when we ought to be there working hard on this. So they don't like that. They don't like the dishonesty. They don't like a Prime Minister looking into a camera and saying this has got nothing to do with Brexit, because they know that's not true. And there are these moments in history. It's the fact of doing it, but it's also being dishonest about why you're doing it. And people just don't like that. And this is, we had to just finish this point. We had a big rally yesterday. I was really struck in the crowd with those that had voted Remain and those that voted Leave, and every political party was represented, because this depth of feeling that this is the wrong way to do it. And this could be avoided. Boris Johnson could come to Parliament, say, this is my proposal, I'm going to put it up for a vote and see whether I can get it through. But he won't do that because he's scared of losing.
So you have spent, I know, part of your summer on a
Quite
wet hillside in Devon, talking on the phone to various other people who agree with you about trying to stop no deal, presumably including Conservatives.
Yes.
And including the Speaker.
I've not spoken to the Speaker.
You haven't spoken to the Speaker?
No, I haven't spoken to the Speaker.
So you don't know at this stage, he hasn't told you, he hasn't given you any indication that you're going to be able to take control of the order paper this coming week?
No, I haven't spoken to the Speaker. What I did at the very end of last term, before we went into recess, was to talk to a number of key individuals across party and say we must use the summer to come up with one plan, so when we get back as soon as we get back this week, we can implement that plan.
Okay, plan. What is it?
One plan. It is to prevent Boris Johnson taking us out of the EU without a deal on the 31st of October.
How?
Very simple. The route will be by legislation, because I believe there has got to be legislation in place to lock this and make it unlawful for him to take us out without a deal. So it's a very simple plan. But I was concerned that over the summer, lots of people will be talking about lots of different plans. We needed one plan to come back.
So can I ask you, is the legislation simply to require Boris Johnson to go to the EU and ask for an extension and no more than that?
Well, Andrew, I'm not going to go into the details, but the purpose of the legislation is clear. The purpose of the legislation is clear, and that is to prevent us leaving without a deal. Obviously, if we're at the 31st of October, that will require an extension. But I think this should be a very short, simple exercise designed to ensure we don't crash out without a deal.
The reason I'm asking is that lots of people want different things. Some people want to revoke Article 50 completely. Some people want a referendum and nothing else. Some people want a general election. Some people want legislation which says we leave but only with a deal, and so on. You've got all this babble of voices. And what I'm asking you is, how do you cut through the noise?
Because of all of that, you keep it simple.
So what is simple is what I'm asking.
You build on the proposition which most people can get around. Most people can get around the proposition that we shouldn't leave without a deal. Because if you look at the implications of leaving without a deal...
So the legislation says we don't leave without a deal.
The purpose of the exercise is to ensure that we don't leave without a deal. There is no mandate for that. That wasn't what people voted for in 2016. That wasn't on the ballot paper. And the claim of those that said leave was that we wouldn't leave without a deal. There is no mandate for it in Parliament. So the Prime Minister is saying, I want to leave, if necessary, without a deal on the 31st of October. He doesn't have a mandate from the people for that. and he doesn't have a mandate from Parliament. And instead,
listening to you very closely, what this must say, what your proposal must be, is that the legislation says we cannot leave the EU without a deal. And if there is no deal by the 31st of October, there must be a request for an extension.
Well, there'll have to be an extension in those circumstances because you can't resolve it in any other way. I don't want to go into the details of it, but keep it simple, keep it straightforward, and keep it a proposition most people can get behind. But this is being forced on us because the Prime Minister's got to... He could say, look, I've become the Prime Minister. I haven't been before the electorate. I haven't been before Parliament. This is my chance. This is my plan.
Yeah,
I will come forward on the first day back. I'll set out my plan in a very open way, and I'll allow Parliament to vote on it. But he won't do that.
Can't you set out your plan in a very open way, in a similar way, and just tell us how long you want the extension for and what the legislation will actually say?
Well, the legislation is intended to ensure we don't leave without a deal. That will require an extension. The length of the extension is secondary, frankly. We've simply got to stop us leaving without a deal. But I do go back to this point because there's always talk about plotting, etc. The Prime Minister can cut through this very easily this week by saying, I'm going to put my proposal up for a vote. And I'm going to live by the result. And if Parliament gives me backing to leave without a deal, so be it. And if they don't, I'll abide by the result. But he won't do it.
As you know, his argument is very strongly that he's engaged in this negotiation with the EU. He wants a deal. Trying to get a deal requires the EU to believe that Britain will leave without a deal, if necessary, at the end of October. And by doing this, you are undermining him, hamstringing him in these negotiations, and making no deal more likely, not less.
Andrew, let's test that theory. And you've got Michael Gove coming on in a minute. Chancellor Merkel and Simon Coveney on behalf of the Irish government have said no proposal has been put on the table by this Prime Minister at all. There's nothing. Nothing.
So we need to know what the basis of the deal is.
He's not even trying for a deal. He's not even trying for a deal. Ask Michael Gove, has anything been put on the table in negotiation? Prime Minister's been Prime Minister for 6 weeks.
But if they think he's hanging by a thread and it's about to be cut, why would they give him anything?
It's not. They've said to him, look, you want an alternative backstop, put one on the table. He's been Prime Minister for 6 weeks.
You can see his point, surely, that they're looking at all of this and they're saying, if you're going to be removed by Parliament, or if Parliament is going to stop you leaving without a deal, there is no pressure on us. The pressure is off completely.
But Andrew, if you're negotiating, and he said he would use the 30 days to put the alternative on the table, the Prime Minister's had years to think what the alternative to the backstop is. He's been very shy about it, and he hasn't brought it. But the second point, just to complete on this, is this idea that if you leave no deal on the table, the EU will blink, was tested in March. We weren't able to prevent a no-deal Brexit until legislation in April. Therefore, up until the 29th of March, the default was no deal, and the EU didn't blink. So the theory that this Prime Minister is operating to shut down...
But he's very different from Theresa May in his approach.
Is he? What has he actually done differently? Has he come up with an alternative to the backstop? No. Is he going for the same mantra, my deal or no deal? Yes. Is he refusing to engage with Parliament?
Okay.
Yes. Where's the difference, actually, apart from the bluster?
He's quite bold. If I was Boris Johnson and you got your way this coming week and you put me into a corner saying you must ask for an extension, I might very well say, absolute no, I'm going to call an election. I know, I'm going to call an election on Guy Fawkes Day, November the 5th. November the 5th election, and the Labour Party would presumably have to vote for that election because, you keep asking for an election. You get an election, what would you do?
Well, that's why this legislation is so important. It's why it needs to be nailed down. And we're all alert to the fact that whilst I never thought Theresa May would take us out without a deal, and I thought she'd live by conventions and norms of behaviour, we're now dealing with a different individual with this Prime Minister. He's disingenuous, and he'll use any means to get around Parliament. So we've got to have a real lock in this legislation that we propose to put forward.
If there is a vote of no confidence in this government, leading therefore to a general election, possibly after the Brexit date, what do you do?
Well, we've been thinking long and hard about that because
What's your conclusion?
we have to have a way of ensuring that we don't crash out during the course of an election. I'm not going to go into the details, but we are absolutely on that point.
But what you've just said is very important. You're saying we would not accept crashing out during the course of an election.
No, of course
if
not.
he calls a November election, that's what would happen. And therefore, you are saying the Labour Party would not vote for a general election if it meant crashing out in the course of that campaign.
Andrew, you're putting words in my mouth. What I'm saying is we have been working all summer on all scenarios. and we have got plans for every scenario, and I'm not going to go into them. But what we're not going to do is allow Boris Johnson, on top of what he's already done, to say, well, I'll arrange things so that we crash out during the course of a general election, which I, Boris Johnson, may not win. That would add insult to injury in terms of what he's already doing.
So, after 2 years of asking for a general election, the Labour Party might not ask for a general election.
No, I'm not saying that, Andrew. Of course, there's the vote of no confidence. That is a judgment call for Jeremy Corbyn to make when he thinks the time is right. The focus for this week is on legislation and making sure if we pass that legislation, we don't leave without a deal. If we get that, there is then that guarantee that whatever is happening on the 31st of October, we can't leave without a deal.
You voted how many times against the deal?
3 times.
3 times against the deal. Do you start to regret that now, given where we are?
No, I don't. What I asked for at the beginning of the exercise was for the Prime Minister, then Theresa May, to bring Parliament in and to come up with a deal we could all get behind. We even put an alternative deal on the table. But what I have never accepted is that there is any point in Parliament or a meaningful vote if the only thing you can say is, well, this is your only deal, you vote for it, or you get no deal. Where's the meaningfulness in that?
Is your absolute priority now to stop no deal?
Yes.
In that case, there are circumstances, we talk about government of national unity. It may well be that there's an attempt to form, as it were, an alternative government in the House of Commons. You know very well that the other opposition parties will not serve under Jeremy Corbyn. In those circumstances, isn't it your patriotic duty to go to Jeremy Corbyn and say, would you mind stepping aside, please, for a few weeks to allow this to happen?
Andrew, for that to happen, we've got to put and win a vote of no confidence. There's then the 14 days. It is quite right that as leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn should try and form a government. That is the way we've done it in this country for a very, very long time, and he should have that opportunity.
But in real terms, to get your objective, it might not.
He was right to say that's what he would do, and we will have to take each stage as we get to it. But if we win the vote of no confidence and get to that stage, it is for the leader of the opposition to see if he can form a government. Of course it is.
And if he can't, do you think he could step?
If he can't, we will address that when we get there.
All right. Now, I mentioned the 3 times you voted against the deal. The other thing, of course, is the Labour Party left the negotiations with Theresa May's government. And at that time, Stephen Kinnock, one of your MPs, said this, and it's very, very prescient. It's not always that prescient comments come from MPs, but here's one. He said this in May. He said, it's very disappointing leaving the talks. It moves us one step closer to leaving the European Union without a deal at all. I think the Brexit Party will do very well at the European elections. They will then complete the job of turning the Conservative Party into a no-deal party. They will then elect a hard Brexiteer like Boris Johnson, and they will allow the country to crash out of the European Union on the 31st of October without a deal. Apart from the last clause in that, everything that he has said there has come to pass.
And it's very important to appreciate why we walked out of those talks. We'd been in those talks for 6 weeks, and they were very serious talks. We took a judgment call that some of the proposals that the Prime Minister was putting forward, she would not be able to get through her own party, that she wouldn't be able to deliver on this. And we were right about that because the talks broke down. The next week, Theresa May stood at the dispatch box and said, I'm going to bring forward the withdrawal bill, and this will be in it, and she spelt out some of what we've been talking about. By the end of that week, her party had taken her out. So our judgment call was that she could not deliver on this, and we were right about that. She couldn't deliver.
If you get this legislation through, it is suggested by some people that royal assent could be withheld.
Well, ask Michael Gove about that, because what Boris Johnson says is this shutting down of Parliament's got nothing to do with Brexit. It's just about a new Queen's speech. So if that's the case, the question for Michael Gove is, will you faithfully implement and abide by any legislation properly passed by the House? Because if it's nothing to do with Brexit, then the normal conventions ought to apply.
So what do you do if they don't?
Well, we'll have to see, because, again, we've been looking into the question of royal prerogative. I think on proroguing, all bills that have finished their passage through the House have to get royal assent. It's one of the conditions of actually shutting down Parliament. So there's going to be another battle on that if there needs to be.
Right.
But ask Michael Gove. Michael Gove seriously?
I've got lots of questions.
Well, is he going to say, look,
you.
if there's legislation properly passed by the House, the next thing Prime Minister Johnson will do is refuse royal assent? Really?
Okay. Final question. Almost a one-word answer, if you wouldn't mind. At the end of this week, will you have prevented a no-deal Brexit?
I certainly hope so.